Donc, bonjour tout le monde. On va commencer la journée de conférence. Euh, donc, pour le dire, aujourd'hui, c'est une journée plus bilingue, on pourrait dire. Il va y avoir des interventions en français et en anglais. Alors, si vous n'êtes pas à l'aise dans l'une des deux langues, il y a des casques d'écoute à l'arrière. Je vous invite à aller les chercher maintenant. So, today is going to be a bilingual day. There will be interventions in both French and English. So if you're not at ease with either of these two languages, you can have we have a live translation available. So you can have oh, I'm losing my English this morning. Headphones, yeah, headphones for to hear the interpreter. Okay, so now will be a good moment if you need either translation in French or English. So thanks everyone for being here. I think there's no more coffee, but more coffee is coming soon. So don't be afraid. So we thought, without much further introduction, I think we will start our first roundtable of the day. So I will invite all participants to this roundtable to come at the front. So we have Colin Scott right here, who will be the animator for our roundtable. Yeah, and James O'Reilly here, Charlie Watt, if you can come. And for your own pleasure, today I will impersonate Harvey Fight, who can be with us today, but he will be on Zoom. But for health reason, I will read his intervention, but he will be available to answer questions. So we will start the roundtable, and at the end there will be time for questions, both on site and on Zoom. So thanks everyone.
Do we have? Okay, Harvey's. Good morning, Harvey.
Either here or here. Which one?
Whichever way you
Good
want.
morning.
Okay, well, you sit.
I'll be on your right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we know.
Say hello to Harvey. Hey, you gotta move. Oh, maybe I should move over, Charlie, because he's on the screen right behind you.
I think we can.
Screen is behind me,
Yeah, just.
so we need to.
Yeah, that's better.
We don't want to be out and see what's my headaches. How is that?
This feels pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay. Bonjour, everyone. Whatcha? Good morning, and I don't know how to do it in Inuktitut. Thank you. It's a delight to have some folks with us on this round table, all three of whom were personally engaged in the years immediately prior to the litigation that eventually led to the negotiations of the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. And we have posed sort of four questions around which each of the panelists will offer 10 to 15 minutes of comment before we open it to free discussion. Our panel again consists of Charlie Watt, Harvey Fight, James O'Reilly, and each with particular roles. We have an Inuk leader, a lawyer, for the Crees and an anthropologist who served as an expert witness in the Malouf trial and who was actively involved in implementation, as were the panel as a whole. So the 4 questions are the following. First, what is your understanding of the core goals of Cree Inuit, of the Crees and Inuit in negotiations? What were the major obstacles to contend with in meeting those goals in both negotiations and implementation? 3, what factors enabled the parties to reach agreement? And 4, how, in your respective views, did Cree and Inuit priorities endure, and how did they shift over the course of 50 years? And whatever else you feel is important to speak to that I've missed with these 4 questions. I think the order that we will follow is first to hear from Charlie Watt, then Harvey Feit will say a few words prior to Emile reading his contribution, and we'll bring it to conclusion with James O'Reilly. Charlie, ready to go?
Is this on now?
Do you want to edit in?
Yeah. I'm not sure whether I want to go first.
Change your mind.
This might be a good opportunity since I have already highlighted certain aspects of our implementation problems yesterday. So I would think that the legalities of the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, since we have already gone through 50 years, would be enlightening to hear what James O'Reilly have to say, because he was one of our principal lawyer at the time when we were dealing with this issue, and we had to make decisions from time to time during that times, depending on the typical issues that we were facing at the time. And James O'Reilly is a good man to highlight the important parts of the agreement, and at the same time, we all know that was the first one, the first original treaty that ever been signed here in Canada, from what I can understand, at least in the modern days. Maybe James O'Reilly can correct me on that aspect of it. If you don't mind, Mr. Scott, if James could go first, then I will follow.
Oh, I thought you were making a joke.
It was partially a joke, but it's not the real joke. So.
Bonjour à tout le monde. Hello, everybody. This is, again, a repeat performance because we were talking recently on a number of occasions about the goals of the agreement, how the agreement has fared over the last 50 years. C'est toujours controversé. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez? Moi j'ai dit à un de mes collègues ce matin, j'ai dit, je m'en viens encore pour être critiqué, mais c'est ça la vie. Bon, the goals. I want to emphasize from the very start, the Crees did not go into this wanting to have an agreement or a treaty or the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. When I was involved, the Indians of Quebec Association had as a goal to get recognition of rights for all of the Quebec Indians, which, a very noble and suitable goal, and people tried very hard to do that. And I still take my hats off to this day to Andrew Delisle and Max Gros-Louis and Aurélien Gill for trying to do this. But for the Crees, it was a battle to stop the James Bay hydroelectric project. Sometimes people don't believe us. But when I was first brought on, it was to stop the project. I was convinced by the Crees that they could not continue their way of life as before in the face of the James Bay and Northern Quebec project. Alors, la bataille, c'était pour la survivance de la culture, de la langue, le mode de vie des Cris. C'est ça la première but, objectif. Alors, c'était pas pour aller signer un traité, c'était pas pour avoir la convention de la Baie James et du Nord québécois. Okay? So that's the first goal. When we went before justice, well, first of all, the Crees tried, and Harvey was involved in that. And when the Inuit joined the Crees out of Fort George in 1972. And there was a bit of reluctance because they were traditional enemies. But Charlie and Zebedee Dungak convinced the Crees, they would be stronger with them. And so everybody went together to try to convince Mr. Bourassa and the Quebec government that it would be a good thing to try to accommodate the Crees and the Inuit. And by accommodating, we were talking about very major changes to the project. Much, much less flooding. They wanted basically run-of-the-river dams, if there were going to be such. And they certainly wanted a lot less impact on their way of life. When it was no-go with Mr. Bourassa, because he considered the Indians and the Inuit as not having any rights. And in this latest movie that just was shown recently on Historia, I said, and I repeat, I was told by a very prominent representative of Quebec, whom I don't want to name, he said, Mr. O'Reilly, Indians and Inuit, they don't have rights, okay? They have privileges of Quebec, okay? So that was the situation in the early 1970s. So then the Inuit, when they saw what Mr. Bourassa was saying, they joined the Crees, and Charlie, take my hat off to him too again, he said, okay, would you like to have some lawyers with you? And we said, of course. And he got Robert Ledvac and Max Bernard. And they were young. Max was a younger guy, and they were tremendous lawyers. And they helped, and we had Monique, Peter Hutchins, and we were all young, I guess, at the time. But the Crees, they were in their early 20s. Billy Diamond was 21 when he was elected chief, so he was around in the early 20s. Ted Moses, the same thing. His brother Albert Diamond of Billy's gang, they were young too. So, la bataille devant le juge Malouf, c'était pourquoi? C'était pour arrêter le projet. C'était pas pour avoir un traité. Et malheureusement, à ce moment-là, il y avait une division avec l'Association des Indiens du Québec qui a dit « Ah ben, il faut qu'on essaie de régler pour tous les Autochtones du Québec. » Et les Cris ont dit « On ne peut pas attendre. Le Moses, le projet, ça se bâtit tous les jours. Alors, il faut qu'on l'arrête. » Alors, ça a été ça, vraiment la divergence ultime. Donc, bataille de la Baie James, je pense que ça a duré à peu près 70 jours. Il y avait des centaines de témoins. Nous autres, on a eu beaucoup plus que 40 témoins autochtones, Cris et Inuits. Et on sait que le juge Malouf a rendu son jugement. Il a dit arrêtez le projet. OK? C'était un ordre à Hydro-Québec, à Québec. Arrêtez le projet de la Baie James. Alors, au début, je pense qu'il y avait quelques problèmes, là, mais par la suite, ils étaient obligés de faire revenir tous les travailleurs dans le Sud. Alors, qu'est-ce qui arrive? Une semaine, là c'était le choc pour le Québec, pour l'Hydro-Québec, etc. Donc, ils disent, il faudrait négocier. Et Jean Chrétien, qui a joué un grand rôle, il est venu et dit, faut négocier, faut négocier. Mais les Cris, les Inuits ont dit, non, on ne peut pas, là. Et Jean Chrétien était fâché contre nous autres un peu, là, mais il était très sincère. Il voulait vraiment avoir une reconnaissance des droits des Autochtones, mais, par contre, il voulait qu'il négocie et pas continuer à la cour. But the Crees and the Inuit said, no, we only have a mandate from our people to stop the project because we can't live with the project. So then then right away, Quebec and the others went to the Quebec Court of Appeal. I remember to this day, okay, they came out, 3 judges. With one, the Chief Justice had a piece of paper in his hand. I said, son of a bee, okay? They've decided already. And so they didn't call on the Quebec attorneys or Hydro's attorneys. They said, Mr. O'Reilly, why should we not lift this injunction? You know, it was sort of difficult to believe, but to this day, I think that was one of my best days of pleading because we gained one day. At least it was the next day where they decided, oh no, the interests of Quebecers take precedence over the interests of a few Indians and Inuit. And what most people don't realize is that we didn't stop there because the Crees and the Inuit said, okay, we're still going to continue this fight. We asked the Supreme Court of Canada for permission to reinstate the judgment of Justice Malouf, lift the suspension. We went, amazingly, the Supreme Court appointed the five senior judges at that time. Unfortunately, 2 were from Quebec and 1 was a former minister. Anyway. But we lost 3-2 after 2 days of argument. They let us go on for 2 days of argument. I still remember the Chief Justice asking me, Mr. O'Reilly, are you saying that the judges did not read the judgment? So I said, I skirted around the question the first day, and the second day he came back and said, are you saying that they did not read the judgment? I said, this, because they said that or indicated that they had read the judgment, I guess I have to believe them. So that was it. But to this day, I don't believe they ever read the judgment. It was well over 100 pages, and they weren't going to digest that within less than a week. In any event, so it was after that Supreme Court decision and intensive lobbying by Minister Chrétien, and then Quebec suddenly was Mr. Chiacha had been appointed. They wanted negotiations. And so the Cree said, no, okay. They went back, they said, we have to go back to the communities. In early January, they went back to the communities and they got permission to negotiate, but conditionally. Okay? On a demandé la permission de négocier, mais tout en continuant la bataille juridique, la bataille judiciaire. So what occurred is that we tried to get permission to go ahead with the proceedings at the same time as they finally agreed to negotiate. So the main purpose of the negotiations was to try to get changes to the project. All right, and there was a particular battle because LG1 was going to be about 22 miles, I forget what that is in kilometers, from the community from Fort George Island at that time. And there was a big fear of erosion and a big worry about flooding. So there were very intense negotiations about changes to the project. And finally, the Crees came around, and the Inuit were very concerned because there was still question about the Great Whale River being diverted down into the Grand River. And secondly, there was the Kaniapiskal-Coxsarwack River, which was going to be reduced in the flow, and that was going to affect the fishing even up around Fort Chimo. So there was a pretty big impact on the Inuit as well as on the Crees. So then the negotiations started, and it led to an agreement in principle on basics. The Crees tried to get as many changes to the project as possible, but it was pretty clear they were only going to be a certain number of changes. And then they said, okay, well, if we're going to look at that, if we're ever going to have to live with Quebec and with Canada, then we have to start thinking about local government, regional government, education, health, the environmental regime for future development, freezing the project, at least as bad as it was. One of the goals was to make sure that any changes to that project, and certainly any additions, would require the consent of the Crees and the Inuit, okay? To the Inuit to the extent that they'd be affected too, and they were. So that goal, it wasn't a transformation of the goal for your second question. I think it's your second question, I'm not sure. But the Crees didn't change the priorities. It was the realities of what they had to face on that. And then so the agreement in principle contained most of the essential elements, but the agreement in principle was only about 40 pages. And the agreement, the final agreement, the negotiations took place over a period of only 12 months because the Crees wanted, and the Inuit as well, the project was being built all the time. So they wanted to say, if we're going to agree on something, we have to set a deadline. And people ask, well, 1 year, that was sort of crazy. Well, in that 1 year, there were some 200 meetings of the various committees. All kinds of committees were set up, environmental committee, technical committee for the complex, for the James Bay complex, working groups on education and on health. Again, specific, Monique was a driving force with the hunting, fishing, and trapping regime, which to this day, in my view, is unequaled throughout Canada. But there was that and the income security program, and the Crees and Inuit had different visions of certain things, like the Crees, the Inuit wanted the regional government to be the main focus, and that was their choice. And for that, they were going to accept more provincial jurisdiction. The Crees wanted to stay, for local government purposes, at least under federal jurisdiction for the moment. But throughout, it was always with the view, one, that it had to be gradual, the steps. They couldn't do everything at once. There were pretty vicious exchanges during the negotiations at times, but they had to accept a number of points. One highlight to this day, which I am very, very proud, I'm glad Charlie is here, is that was the first recognition of the Inuit as having rights, very strong rights, in regard to the territory, in regard to the natural resources. And so that was the first quote-unquote treaty with the Inuit in Canada. And that was a big precedent for other Inuit groups, because before, you all remember that the Indian Act, that wasn't much of a piece of legislation. I remember when they were running around, the federal government was saying, well, we'll have consultations on the Indian Act. Well, no one wanted the Indian Act, but that was the only piece of legislation, the federal legislation, that recognized some little rights. So the Indians across Canada, and I was involved in going to some of these meetings across Canada, they kept saying, we want our rights constitutionalized. So what happened is in 1969, Mr. Trudeau said, oh, they don't like, and Mr. Chrétien, they don't like the Indian Act, fine, we'll abolish it. But they forgot about the part that they wanted the rights constitutionalized. So that, hence the white paper, le livre blanc. C'est comme ça que ça a été créé. But to go back to the negotiations. So the negotiations, the Crees, there was a huge controversy where, because of the surrender and the extinguishment clause, la clause de cession et la clause d'extinction. Et ce qui est arrivé, il y avait les lois de 1804, ben, surtout de 1912 et de 1898. Il n'y avait pas de mention dans l'extension des frontières du Québec jusqu'à la rivière Isthmée. Pour l'extension jusqu'à la baie d'Ungava, il y avait une disposition qui disait que la province devait chercher la cession des droits des Autochtones. OK? Là, donc, ça a été une sine qua non pour le Québec et le Canada. Il fallait chercher la cession des droits parce que c'était pour eux, c'était une partie, la condition que ce territoire-là devenait le territoire du Québec. Quant à l'extinction, ce qui est arrivé, c'est qu'ils ont dit on ne veut pas que l'autre groupe autochtone essaie d'arrêter notre projet ou nos projets, nos développements. Alors, à ce moment-là, ils ont dit le fédéral va faire l'extinction. Les Cris n'ont pas voulu, les Inuits n'ont pas voulu ça, ils se sont battus, mais ils disent il n'y a pas de convention s'il n'y a pas ça. Donc, jusqu'à aujourd'hui, c'est une grande controverse et on est blâmé pour avoir éteint, comme si les Cris des Inuits ont éteint les droits des autres. Non, mais aussi, on avait des discussions, et ça peut-être je ne devrais pas vous le dire, là, mais en partie, c'est qu'on a eu beaucoup de discussions internes et on a décidé, bon, OK, c'est quoi la clause de l'extinction? C'est quant aux terres, selon nous. Parce que devant le juge Moloff, on avait dit c'est la possession exclusive des Autochtones, à savoir qu'on pouvait sortir tous les Blancs du territoire. Alors, si c'est ça, une possession exclusive, à ce moment-là, Hydro-Québec, le gouvernement du Québec, c'était tous des intrus. Pas des Autochtones qui étaient des intrus, eux autres étaient des intrus. Alors, à ce moment-là, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Alors, nous autres, on pensait que la clause était limitée au titre indien, c'est-à-dire dans les terres. Mais aussi, on a dit, on n'a pas parlé des ressources. Mais à ce moment-là, toutes les ententes de ressources naturelles dans l'Ouest parlaient des ressources naturelles, parlaient des terres, des royautés, etc. Alors, on a dit, OK, ils n'ont pas fait des ressources. Et plus tard, évidemment, si les CRI avaient... On disait que non, ils n'ont pas cédé leurs droits quant aux ressources naturelles. Ils ont accepté le projet, par exemple. Et le projet, ça veut dire de l'eau. Ils ont été contraints d'accepter ce projet-là. Mais il n'y a pas beaucoup de monde qui veut voir ces dimensions-là. Alors, si on dit à tous nos droits, et avec beaucoup de respect pour beaucoup de groupes autochtones qui disent ils ont enlevé nos droits, bien, les Cris et les Inuits, à ce moment-là, ont pensé que le territoire, tout le territoire était à eux. Mais s'ils s'étaient trompés, bien, ils ont dit de toute façon, les Cris n'ont pas cédé tous leurs droits. Et regardez comme en 2002, avec la paix des Braves, s'ils avaient cédé tous leurs droits, comment ça se fait que les royautés étaient là pour le Québec pendant 50 ans? Et le Canada, c'était un peu la même chose un peu plus tard, en 2008. Mais plus, il y avait beaucoup de batailles contre les compagnies forestières et il fallait faire des choses différemment. So what I'm saying is that the natural resources, insofar as the Crees are concerned, and insofar as any other group that considers that they still have rights in that territory, they should go, they should sue. And a number of them have sued, but they haven't really pushed or because of problems of constraint, and because now the agreement, the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement in 2010 was considered to be a treaty and constitutionalized, so it's going to be pretty tough to knock out the agreement. But the other groups don't have to knock out the agreement. They just say, well, that just doesn't affect us. But they're not doing that. Anyway, so that's part of it. The other question going into implementation, was implementation rocky? Very rocky. Okay, did the agreement have parts of it that were an agreement to disagree? Absolutely. Absolutely. We tried to get, for instance, programs, services, and all the rest, huge fights with the federal government in particular, but also with Quebec. But it's as if, people don't realize that it takes two to tango, eh? And you hit roadblocks, you hit points where people said, no, then. And so sometimes it was better to pull back a bit, say, but have the door open and wait until later on. The Crees used the technique of these supplementary agreements, or what they call complementary agreements, amending agreements, so that over the years, I remember many discussions internally with Billy and with the other lawyers, Monique, Peter, and and Ted Moses and a lot of representatives of the Crees that we said, and Rod Pachano, and we said, okay, we have to have amending procedures in that agreement, because unlike some of the numbered treaties out west, where it's sort of a one-time document, and now the fight is still there, saying, well, what was the real intention, the true spirit and intent of those treaties? The Crees said, okay, we're going to have amending formulas for each of the sections of the different agreement, and we'll see what happens. And the Inuit and the Crees, mostly Crees, but the Inuit as well, there have been 30 amendments now to the JBNQA, to the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. So it's an evolving, living document. There is no decision to say this particular point has to be frozen for all time. This particular point in the agreement. That wasn't the position. So people don't say we are so proud of exactly what was said at one particular point in time that you can't change it. No, everything can be changed. And there have been lots of modifications. For instance, one of the chapters, too bad Monique isn't up here to explain, she's sitting there, but the whole section on income security was replaced. Okay? So this is an example. Ils ont pris un chapitre de la Convention et ils l'ont remplacé. Pas de problème. Si tout le monde était d'accord. Alors, pour l'Hydro-Québec aussi, chaque fois qu'il voulait changer le projet, il a fallu chercher le consentement des Cris et des Inuits pour une partie qui pouvait affecter le Coxswack. Et donc, il y a eu plusieurs conventions. Et là, quand on parle de la Convention de la Baie James, je vais terminer là-dessus, là. Excusez-moi, Monsieur le Président, mais quand on parle de la Convention de la Baie James, il faut parler des 30 amendements, conventions complémentaires, et il faut parler d'à peu près une centaine d'ententes satellites qui sont issues ou qui sont reliées à la Convention. Je sais, j'en ai plusieurs dans mon bureau, là. Alors, it's a living document. There's nothing, some say it's a sacred document. Yeah, it is the basic principles, but a lot can be changed if the Crees consent. And for the Inuit, I think it's the same thing. And I think the Inuit, well, Charlie can explain, but I believe that the Inuit want a number of changes to the agreement. That's fair game. That's fine. I mean, no one is perfect. The whole point was to open the doors to, and from little from a little number of provisions. For instance, in Chapter 9 of the James Bay Agreement, there emerged a Cree-Niscapi of Quebec Act. From the Cree-Niscapi of Quebec Act, there emerged a governance agreement. The governance agreement then was approved by federal legislation, such that now you never see anybody in the federal government around. They have no rights, no powers, no jurisdiction. They have the money, but that's where the relationship comes in. Is give us the money. So that's the big fight is for the financing of some of this. But in the meantime, more and more the Crees are becoming autonomous, independent. You all have heard about some of the companies there, Quebec, quite successful. So it was in a way it was a very gradual point. It was a very big point in history, but it's an evolving document. So with that, if people look back and say, well, do you consider it a success still? Yeah, I do, because the Crees do. With the 50th anniversary, we were up there last week, and they're a lot of very, very happy with the basic principles, because it has to be one of the examples of what can be done with coexistence. And you all are familiar probably with the famous quote of Chief Justice Lemaire in Delgamuc, that we're all here to stay. So people have to make an accommodation at certain levels. Doesn't mean you don't keep going in court and fighting on when you can't agree. But when you can find a path to coexistence which respects and recognizes rights of the Aboriginal peoples, then perhaps there's been quite a bit of progress. It's a long way from when I first started as a lawyer, where people were saying that Indians have no rights. Anyway, with that, thank you. I'm sorry I took a lot of time. Harvey, I don't know if you approve, but and Charlie, but thank you, Charlie, for the Inuit help in this big battle, because I remember to this day thanking your lawyers and the Inuit, staying very tough and very strong. So you were right when you came to Fort George that they would be better with the Inuit, and that was so. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Was that 10 minutes?
You could stretch 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Would you like to go next, Mr. Watt?
Thank you, James. I think that gives a sort of an overall picture of what we went through and the legalities that we have to follow and make changes whenever it's necessary. Thank you, James. You've been very helpful to the Inuit over the years, representing the Crees from time to time. You were also, we're not making any bones about it, you were also representing us too. Thank you. We too have a slight differences with the Cree Nation. The time that we were become aware of what was coming to our doorsteps, it was not an easy issue to think about what are we going to do, knowing the fact that we had no instrument, no tools to fight with, not even the financing, a meaningful financing, to upset what the government of Quebec were trying to do to our territory, which we, as an Inuit, utilized that on a daily basis. We know our country, we know our land, we know our water, we know how sensitive the earth is when it comes down to dealing with the north, climate change and all that. And that is what's happening today. Some of you people don't know what's happening in the north. The soil is gradually thawing out, and it was a permanent frozen in the past. Permanent frost is gone. You have to all understand that, what that means. So it's not only our life is at stake, it's your life is also at stake. So we should become fully aware of what's happening in the northern part of Canada. The land itself, the sea, what's in it, we rely on a daily basis as Inuit. That's our livelihood. When we first began to start realizing what is about to come, after the Prime Minister had made the statement saying that he was going to speeding up the project that he would like to carry forward while he was a premier of Quebec, creating electricity, amount of electricity that would be sold to the outside Quebec. We, as Inuit, I'm just going to talk about Inuit. I'll leave this up to the Crees to talk about their differences if they need to. Was a very important to us, knowing the fact that our daily life was going to be impacted by this project. James mentioned about the diverting Kanawapaska towards the James Bay. That has been done. I sure would like to invite you to come and take a good look at what's happened to that particular river. It's gone, dried up. Matter of fact, the flow of that river is changing and disturbing earth around it. So it's not an easy issue because it's not only concentrated on the river itself alone. Surrounding that river is also being impacted. And that's what we're going to have to live with. Today, our hunters, when they have to travel upwards, looking for caribous, looking for species that they use, whether it's for eating, for clothing, or whatever, economy, they can't travel anymore the way that they used to, on account of the fact that Kanawapaska is pretty well dried up now. It's gone, finished. We can't use it anymore. We are lucky enough to be able to say that there was another river that connected to the Kanawapaska River before they hit down to Kutchuk River. It's not impacted at the moment, but there is a very, very possibility down the road if the Hydro-Quebec decided to revisit the Great Well River, a dam which they have promoted in the past. That is going to be affected also. Then all our river, including the two river meets, Large River and the Kanawapaska, into Kutchuk River. That Kutchuk River, right in the front of the community, the tides, when it comes up as high tide, it comes up, but when it goes down, you can almost walk across the river now from the community to the other side of the river. That's how much the impact has been done to us. So when we heard about this project, not only hear about it, but I heard it first time I heard about it was on the radio. For some reason, I had to go to the post office, and I saw on the bulletin board, the Premier, Robert Bourassa, making a statement that he's going ahead with this project. That's when I realized that they are serious and they're going to be moving on that. So I went back to my office. This was a very new office that I have created after I was exiled from my own community by federal government because I was working for the federal government and they didn't like the idea voicing my opinion towards a project because they had a negative content to it, and I just could not stay away from that subject matter. Inuit need representations at that time. We didn't have any tools and instrument as a way of voicing our opinion at that time. And we still have that problem today. But we are overcoming the problems that we had before. But the problem is that there are still projects, different kinds of projects that is going to be coming towards north for the purpose of extracting energy that exists in the north and bring that energy down to the south. What do we get out of that? Nothing. The good possibility of having a James Bay Northern Quebec agreement, something that we can build on. That's the way that we are looking at it as Inuit. It's a one step forward towards something that needs to be done and to be dealt with. So the instrument that we have is a very much still unfinished issue. Talking about the self-government issue, James mentioned that one of our priorities was a regional government. No, that was not our priority as a regional government, because the government of Quebec at that time even told us during the negotiation they don't have the power to make changes to the law. We cannot make a regional government. And I have to turn around because I did a bit of a studies on that before, that they do have power. It's within their legislation. They can create the regional government. Regional government was not the instrument that we were after. We were pushing for self-government, ethnic government. In order to be able to entertain outside world, we felt the best way to do that is to have ethnic government, ethnic base, based on the Inuit. So that is something that we are still working on. We hope to be able to further materialize that. I think we too have leverage that have not been touched by the federal government. That is the constitutional rights that we have negotiated back in 1982. James O'Reilly is fully aware of that. This is a big opportunity for us to make some corrections to what things happened in the past before, because there are certain things that I myself personally cannot live with. That is extinguishment, surrender, and release. That destroyed our people when that subject matter was brought up to the attention of the public through the negotiations. Our communities made it very clear that's not what they're looking for. If you do exist, if you get rid of the existing rights that do exist, we do believe. Government of Canada at times come to the conclusion and say, maybe they do exist, but maybe they don't exist. Back in 1912 Extension Act, this is when we were impacted very heavily. We woke up one morning not knowing what happened during that 1912 Extension Act negotiations or whatever that was, realigning the country. You know, we were not there. We were not capable. Let alone, we had no proper communications at that time, and I guess they didn't have a way of communicating with it. But in the text itself, 1912 Extension Act is quite clear that they did not know what they were dealing with. This is a matter that have to be brought to the attention of the public, of the world, for that matter. Because the Aboriginal groups are not only within Canada, United States, all over the world. So this matter needs to be dealt with. Unless this matter is dealt with properly, legally, properly, and recognize the rights, we don't want Government of Canada or Government of Quebec, for that matter, to think that they have the right to extinguish our right. They have no right to extinguish our right, as far as I'm concerned. This is a matter that, James, you and I probably, if we're still good enough to be able to walk forward, we might have to take it to the Supreme Court of Canada to get it done for once and for all. Not only for the James Bay issue, but for the whole Canada itself alone. Let's put it all together and make some proper corrections and move forward. And hopefully this will work this time, because what's happening today is not working. At times, we have no choice to feel very small, knowing the fact some of your people are being killed, shot to kill. That's what's happening in the north right now. We had about 19 people have been shot by the police in our communities. This have to stop. And this is the matter. I think we're going to have to take it. We have no choice to take it to the court. Does the outside world have the right to kill? Shoot to kill. If they're having a hard time controlling the person because of intoxicated or whatever that may be, there is a way to deal with that person. Unless you are planning to shoot to kill, shoot them in the arm, shoot them in the legs. They don't even think about that. And this is what's happening to our community today. And that have to change. And we are planning to go to court and deal with this issue. And we have no choice. Anyway, back to the James Bay issue. On the self-government issue, yes, we are still pushing for the self-government. We are still pushing for the government that will be operating on the basis of their heritage, and the foundation would be the Inuit. Then some people are probably going to be saying, what about us? How are we going to be able to deal with you? I think we'd be able to deal with you a lot better than the way we are dealing with you now, dealing with the outside world. Knowing the fact that we have the tools that are sharp enough to be able to make things change. This, we don't have that yet. Are we moving in that direction? Inuit, I know for a fact, they are very, very good when it comes down to economics. We've done well in the field of economics. We've done a lousy job in the field of social concerns. That we have to improve ourselves, and the people that we deal with on the other side of the table also have to understand their lifestyles are not quite different, so I have to have a bit of a patience to allow us to understand where they're coming from. So in return, we can also understand where they're coming from. This is where we're at as Inuit. It's not an isolated issue. The question of extinguishment and surrender, it's been applied to all the modern treaties that has been signed up to now. Every one of them. Where the problem was risen and identified, it's a key issue that needs to be rectified. If it's possible to remove it, remove it. This is a task, James. I guess you and I are going to have to carry. I'm no longer senator. I've been in the Senate for 34 years, and I have learned quite a bit on how the government works and things in that nature. I did a lot of things in terms of planting the seeds, knowing the fact this battle is not going to be finished today. It's going to go on for many years down the road. On that account, James, and I guess we do have leverages that we did not have at the time when you and I were battling the government, battling the Hydro-Quebec. We didn't have those, but there are more now. We are more ready now than we were before. And I do believe Aboriginal groups across the country have the same feeling as I do. And there's no doubt that in my mind, especially when it comes down to the point of wanting us to remove extinguishment clause in the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement. All those negative components, we need to remove them if we're going to have a successful relationship in the political field and economic field. There was one other point that I would like to make is the way that money being made available to us from time to time, either it's from the federal government or the provincial government. It's almost like a handout. What does that make you feel? You knowing the fact that you got the rights and you got the resources under your feet. And that has been not put aside. They put a ceiling, not a ceiling on it, but it's something that I'm not quite sure what kind of English word that I can use on this issue. Anyway, folks, we're here. We're going to continue to be here. We're going to continue to keep battling on things that we need to move forward and try to rectify some of the things that has been happening in the past, if we ever going to be able to work together and decently and whatnot. But we are getting tired of our resources being sold outside of our territory, and we're not getting any clean energy. But the United States is, by the fact that the sold of electricity is a lot of money. What percentage of that do we get? $90 million compensation. We did pretty good when it comes down to the point of creating companies and things in that nature, the airline companies, the marine fishing, international shrimp fishing, things in that nature, and we did very, very well. with a little what we got. And we can do a hell of a lot more. At times, the law prevents you from moving forward. Unfortunately, we have to live with the law. And at times, we want to be heard when we say, this is not good for us, this needs to be replaced, this needs to be removed. This is what I would like to see. Maybe we need to set up a group of very special people to identify those problem areas, the sore area, for the people to decide, the public that is, what do you do? What do you do with those? How are you going to make changes? How are you going to be able to convince the government, lawmaking authorities and things in that nature and that? But like I said, we do have a leverage. We have a constitutional rights have not been implemented. Government of Canada, it seems like, bit reluctant stepping on our constitutional rights to implement, because they know themselves it's not going to be that easy. It's going to disturb many instruments that Government of Canada have. A lot of changes would have to take place. On those accounts, I do hope, as a person that have been involved on the first instrument that we're dealt with for the original people in Quebec, the Cree and Inuit, I do believe we've done a good job. And I'm very proud of that. But at the same time, don't forget, there are things that we do not want to see in the agreement, and they need to be removed. That is extinguishment, surrender, and right. I don't know how we're going to do that, but this is something that the lawyers are going to have to wrestle with, because it's not an easy area, but it has to be dealt with. We need to go all the way back to the time of when the country was being put together and so on. The provinces were giving more power and more lands and things in that nature back in 1912. We were totally forgotten, even though that they didn't have any problem in the text, the way that they interpreted back in 1912. To first, when they begin to start dealing with the government, is starting to move towards finalizing certain relationships and things in that nature and that. After that, you were supposed to be extinguished. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? Does that mean that the rights that we have now, all of a sudden down the road, is going to be considered to be extinguished? What we have already negotiated? I don't know. It's a subject to the interpretation of those provisions, and James is going to have to wrestle with those. And he's wrestled with them on a almost daily basis, because he's still with the Aboriginal groups that he started his law firm with. And the fact I didn't have a lawyer, we didn't have a firm as a Northern Quebec Inuit Association. James was very much instrument in terms of giving us a highlight and who to talk to and things in that nature and that. And I remember those words. And even though that James and I don't always agree with each other on certain given points, especially in the time that Zebedee and I went to Fort George before it was Sassabee, was an island. For some reason, we developed the courage, I guess, so we decided to go over there without being invited. That's on account of the fact that I saw the bulletin board saying that they were going to have a meeting in Fort George and so on. Some of our Inuit people were already a member of the Indian Quebec Association at that time. And I had to try to undo that when that happened. So Kutuarapik, which is a Great Well River, and Sasasebi, the Inuit members were already had membership card from Indian Quebec Association. Max Gulu was in Inukjuak at the time when I went to Inukjuak for the first meeting. He was already collecting membership fees and so on. I said, what the hell are you doing? You know, because I got to know him because I used to work with him when I was very young and so on. So we got to know each other, Andrew DeLille and those people, on the friendship basis, and I try to keep it at that level, that I have to undo what you have done. So he agreed. Not right away, but eventually he agreed because he had no choice. Because I was just creating an instrument, such as Northern Quebec Unity Association, that was the first instrument that we have put together. I had no lawyer at that time. I was able to, on account of the fact that I guess my interest in this field was strong enough, lead me to begin to start building a contact with some key people, the legal people, and things in that nature and that. Jan Chiatse was one of them. I never thought for a moment that he was going to be appointed to be the hitman for the government of Quebec, because he was my personal lawyer at the time, before he got that mandate from the government. And he was also Deputy Minister of Indian Affairs at that time. So he was a very helpful, even though that he was representing the government wishes and things in that nature and that, but he was a helpful in terms of navigating what to do and where to go and how to put an impact on things what we were dealing with. I can go on for the whole day, but I think you heard enough, and James have painted the picture quite well in terms of what it is and why we're here. And the time that he mentioned that there was no intention of allowing that project to go through. That is very right. Our first move, what we decided, we were not even thinking about anything else, to stop the project. That was the point. Got the movement going on the Inuit side and also on the Cree side. And I think we have done quite well. And it was a booty shaker during the time that chuckling around. Judge Malouf, an example, I was happened to be interpreting for him when he was a criminal on the criminality side of it, when he was already a judge. So I have to pretend that I did not know him. And he also treated me exactly the same way, because of the importance of what we're about to deal with. Personalities does not fit in. So we kept it apart. We have made the decisions that we're not going to talk with each other during the whole proceeding. Anyway, folks, I think I said enough, and there was a lot more that I could cover. As you know, that our fellow Inuit, our neighbors, our sisters and brothers and so on in the Nunavut area have been given recognition of being able to administer a public government. What does that mean? Does that mean that when the population is no longer the majority, Inuit in Nunavut, the day is coming? The new Prime Minister is talking about militaries and militarizing the North and things in that nature and that. In one shot, they're not going to have the majority. What's going to happen there? This is something that, James, we're going to have to wrestle with, because it's already been done. And the Inuit is already exercising their rights in terms of bottom of the sea, the continental shelf, and all the exploration is taking place, at least that they are part of it now. But the thing is, down the road, when you're no longer majority as a population in Nunavut, they're going to lose control in one day. This is something that, at the moment, Inuit is really not talking about it, but it's coming. There was a good friend of mine, still talks to me periodically, and I talk to him periodically also. His name is Taga Curley from Nunavut. You probably, James, you know Taga Curley. Unfortunately, he was running for the new government, Nunavut government. Something happens, he decided not to push it forward at the moment. But I'm sure he's going to be coming around soon. Hopefully help us to get back what has been taken away from us through the extinguishment, surrender, and released. We cannot live with that. I want you to know that. This is not right. We have the full right to exercise our rights, just like you, like anybody else in this planet. Hopefully that one day we have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will turn now to Harvey Fight, and I believe, Harvey, you have a couple of words to say before Emile reads your presentation. Oh, your sound seems to be off.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks, Colin. I just want to say I'm very sorry not to be with everyone today in person in Montreal. And I'm particularly sorry not to be on the stage with Charlie Watt and Jim O'Reilly, who've given us some very informative and powerful presentations. But I look forward to participating and hearing more online. In order to have the talk presented in person, I've asked Emile if he would read it, and he's graciously agreed to do so, and I thank him. Emile.
Okay. So I think the illusion is perfect. I am Harvey Fight now. I will start my speech. We have been asked, what is your understanding of the core goals of the Cree Inuit in negotiations? EU negotiators of the GBNQA have written and talked about many goals EU had. As an advisor working on parts of the negotiation, I was focused on some of these goals. Among the core goals was to continue and expand EU self-determination and to reverse the long history of colonial domination, marginalization, and racism by Quebec, Canada, and resource corporations. These were related to settling the land claims and jurisdictions of Indigenous Quebec and Canadian governments. EU also were rebuilding the EU nation. An important immediate goal was to stop the James Bay hydroelectric project, or to negotiate a modified project with effective provisions for the lives of affected EU families. Pursuit of these goals was to be guided by EU way of doing things, EU Edun, so that this process renewed the EU way of life, EU Pimatzuin. I think much of what the EU people have done over the last 50 years has strengthened and expanded EU self-determination, challenged colonialism, and rebuilt the EU nation. They have used an extraordinary series of initiatives and opportunities, some flowing from the GBNQA and others going well beyond what was envisaged 50 years ago. Noteworthy, in my view, have been the ways that EU leaders and people have taken over and expanded control of their communities and institutions, expanded EU governance of the public lands of EUSG, and made their consent essential for most new resource developments on EUSG. This history is unusual in Canada and the world, and it depends on the commitment and work of EU leaders and many EU and other people, as well as on the unique resources and circumstances available to them. By choice and necessity, EU have also sought diverse new collaboration and partnerships with government and resource corporations to meet EU goals and changing EU needs. But there are still significant impacts on EU of ongoing colonial relationships, and EU self-determination is incomplete. I have not done continuous work or research with EU throughout the whole of these 50 years, so I can comment only on parts of this EU history. My comments draw on my involvement as a social science advisor during the EU court case, the negotiations and early implementations of the GBNQA, and intermittent work with EU thereafter. And I draw on my continuing contacts with several generations of EU families and teachers, starting before the GBNQA, mainly at Waswanipi, whom I have known for over half a century. From those families, I often hear how much has changed, a lot for the better. I also hear about some disappointments and unresolved conflicts. A recurrent comment is the difficulty of protecting land and game from the destruction caused by the massive and largely unregulated non-indigenous occupation and use of EUSG. This has developed despite the GBNQA. Despite EU practices of sharing land so that everyone can make a living, and despite EU efforts to jointly manage land use with other governments. This joint management should include the full involvement of the EU Nduo Chimao, or traditional land stewards and hunting leaders. EU land stewards and hunting leaders are a traditional form of EU self-governance and law who exist alongside EU First Nation and Cree Nation governance, and therefore are a part of EU self-determination. I understand that having the full engagement of land stewards could make a practical difference for land conservation and land use, and for their contributions to EU ways of life today. Unsurprisingly, these unresolved issues are not recognized by the Quebec or Canada. Looking back to the earlier numbered treaties in the West, we find that roughly 50 to 100 years after signing those treaties, the indigenous nations undertook comprehensive documentation, recording, and research on their treaty histories. They focused on their community members' knowledge and stories transmitted across generations, as well as on numerous archival and non-indigenous sources. This research convincingly demonstrated that the indigenous treaties they signed with Canada are radically different from the treaties that government and the Canadian public understand were signed. I suggest that 50 years after the signing of the GBNQA, EU-led recording, documentation, and research project on EU GBNQA histories, stories, knowledge, treaty relationships, and implementation could clarify how EU people understand the GBNQA they signed. Research could clarify what the EU GBNQA is, as opposed to what governments assert of the GBNQA. Such research on the GBNQA is now timely, as a good number of the surviving EU community members who were adults at the time of the negotiations and who ratified the GBNQA are now 70 years of age or older. Some political and legal analysts have said these kind of indigenous histories and research are not relevant for a modern treaty like the GBNQA. Modern treaties are long and detailed texts that all parties signed and ratified. Indigenous negotiators were fluent in English or French. Lawyers and consultants were available to indigenous people throughout the negotiations. The negotiation lasted years, and voluminous documentation of negotiation was produced and archived by each of the parties. This analysis is wrong, as it ignores much of what happened and what the GBNQA means. For example, most adults in EU communities in 1975 were monolingual or not fully functional in English or French. EU negotiators and leaders explained the GBNQA to people almost entirely in the Cree language, EU Emun. In many meetings in communities, including the meetings held to vote on ratification of the GBNQA, people heard a full day in Cree of detailed explanations of what was in the agreement before making decisions or voting. Philippe Awashish, who was one of the lead negotiators of the GBNQA, has also commented in discussions on the difficulties of translation from English or French language text into Cree. He explains how the agreement is understood differently by Cree than by government officials or by the non-Indigenous lawyers and advisors. For example, there is no word in Cree that is equivalent to the word rights or droit in English and French. The word rights was expressed using a Cree word with related but also significantly different meaning. Philippe explained that the Cree word means a capacity or potential. Based on what I have understood from my EU teacher, I think capacities or potentials are a core of being human. They are not things you can give away, extinguish, or receive from others, unlike rights. You live and develop capacities and potentials in the course of social life. What the EU were thinking at the time of negotiation is therefore important. Philippe Awashish has also explained that when EU said they were not being respected and were excluded from decisions by governments and resource corporations, they were saying in Cree, we are human beings. They insisted that they are coexisting human equals of non-indigenous peoples, and they should not be treated this way by governments and corporations. This is part of what EU were negotiating and claiming, and part of what the GBNQA is about for them. A practical example of differences was the negotiations of the claims to jurisdictions over hunting, land, and game. From the beginning, the parties expressing fundamentally opposing positions. EU and Inuit negotiators said that the Cree and Inuit had been stewarding the land and game for millennia, and they expected to continue to do so. Philippe Awashish explained the EU system of Ndohuishi and Ndohuchimao as the EU system of allocating community authority and responsibility to hunting leaders for the stewardship of the hunting territories and for decisions on how EU and others can use the land. He said Quebec and Canadian game laws were treating some EU hunting activities as illegal, and that conservation officer repeatedly threatened and harassed EU families. Zebedee Nungak and Mark Gordon, Inuit negotiators, said Quebec only had a presence in the Inuit lands for 10 years prior to the 1970s, and that Quebec had done little about the land, games, animals, or conservation. Quebec and Canada said their jurisdiction over game and hunting were rooted in the Canadian legal system, which only recognizes their respective jurisdiction and that their laws apply to everyone, including EU and Inuit. Early negotiations failed to resolve these differences. EU suggested that decisions be made through a joint coordinating committee. This expressed EU willingness to share land management and their seeking acknowledgement of the coexistence and equal standing of Indigenous Quebec and Canadian jurisdictions. Coordination and joint decisions by these jurisdictions were necessary to effectively conserve land and games. However, for Quebec and Canada, negotiations of a coordinating committee remained almost entirely a form of consulting Indigenous people as part of the exercise of their supraordinate jurisdictions and decisions. Based on my ongoing work tracing the history of this conflict through the dozens of negotiating documents, the next year and a half of negotiations did not resolve this conflict. The unresolved conflict is explicitly represented in the text of the GBNQA. Section 24 recognizes Critaliman, which are Ndu Chimau, EU hunting leaders, and also Cree trap lines, which are Ndu Schi, EU hunting territories. For some EU families, the inclusions of hunting leaders and hunting territories in the GBNQA is a recognition of the equivalence and coexistence of EU land, game, and hunting governance. For Quebec and Canada, this system is internal to EU society and subordinate to their jurisdictions. Hence, the disappointment, frustration, and sometimes anger of some EU families today about the continuing lack of full participation in decision-making by Ndu Chimau. Putting the GBNQA into practice over the decades, the Cree Nation government has done much determined and successful work toward putting EU joint governance and jurisdictions into practice alongside and with Quebec and Canada. But the discontent and protest of some Ndu Ojimau or hunting leaders over recent decades, some reported in media, indicate that conflicts over lands towards jurisdiction and the destruction caused by non-Indigenous occupation and use of the territory are unresolved. This despite the continuing work of the Cree Nation government and many committed EU and staff. In summary, I think that documenting and learning from the EU histories, stories, knowledge, and accounts of the GBNQA negotiations, conflict, and implementation will be valuable to undertake now. It will contribute to the continuing pursuit of EU self-determination today and by future generation of EU. Thank you.
Well, wonderful, illuminating comments, analyses. I have a bit of a problem with time management now. We're 20 minutes into the coffee break, and I think we do want to take some questions. So just thinking about if we can maybe push another 10 minutes into the coffee break, and then maybe just break for 10 or 15, and then we can push into the lunch another 15 minutes. We should still be able to be fair to Roundtable 2 in terms of them having time before we break for lunch. If that's agreeable, let's take a few questions for the panel. Hand up there, I see. I think you'll need to use the mic.
Hi, I'm Franklin Gertler. I'm a lawyer who had the privilege of working with Peter Hutchins, the late Peter Hutchins, and many of the people here. Harvey, I had a question for you, if you will. Great to see you. I have wondered, because you said you were a social scientist who was in the service of the Cree, and I wonder whether in the desire to reproduce, if you like, across Canada, the model, quote unquote, model of the JPNQA, we have failed to enrich the work further with new social science. In other words, that there's been a cookie cutter approach, and it's become the domain of lawyers and financial people, and that we're not, and I noticed it in RCAP, for example, very little new social science outside of the immediate subjects of the Royal Commission. Anyway, I wonder whether you'd comment on that.
It's a very broad question, one I don't feel fully competent to respond to. I see what you're saying, but I also see that there has been important new social science in collaboration with law and Indigenous knowledge. I think a lot of the breakthroughs in bringing Indigenous knowledge into the center of research have involved collaboration, new kinds of collaborations with communities. For example, the recognition of Indigenous law has expanded, and it's been a joint project of Indigenous peoples and social science researchers, many of whom themselves are Indigenous. I think the same can be said of Indigenous history, so that I'm much more aware, and also the debates on recognition and resistance. And I'm much more aware, therefore, I think, of the fact that social sciences have been changing, and they've done so by much more intensive collaborations with Indigenous communities and Indigenous scholars and Indigenous community intellectuals. But that's my sense of it. Thanks.
Where's the mic? Can someone pass a mic to Pierre?
Oui, bonjour. Mon nom est Pierre Trudel, je suis enseignant. 50 ans, c'est vraiment l'histoire. Et lorsqu'on enseigne, là, moi, j'ai deux questions précises, à savoir, qu'est-ce qui est arrivé finalement avec les Inuits dissidents? Puisqu'il y avait, au moment de la signature de la Convention, je pense, 3 villages qui s'opposaient à la signature de la Convention. Et bon, j'ai suivi ça à ce moment-là, mais aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qui arrive avec cette dissidence-là? L'autre question, ça concerne, est-ce que c'est exact que les consultations qui ont été faites chez les CRI, lorsqu'on a présenté un document au CRI de la Convention de Baie James, il n'y a eu que 26% de la population CRI qui aurait voté pour le texte de la Convention de Baie James. Donc, quelle a été la proportion des votants qui appuyaient chez les CRI la Convention de Baie James?
I'm sorry to say that I'm not really up to part when it comes to French. So I didn't realize that I had this with me and I didn't have it turned on, so I only got a certain parts of it. About distant communities. Distant community, what's going on here? Yeah. A distant community is still alive, very much alive, and they have not changed their mind in regards to the fact that the rights have been extinguished forever. So that's an issue that we need to deal with and to come up with a solution on that matter. And I think the best way to deal with that is to remove it from the clause. The part that deals with the extinguishment, surrender, and released. I don't think any government have the rights to extinguish anybody. And even though that the colonial system that they have followed over the years from the beginning, it's still here very much. And that is going to have to be changed, hopefully. They have made the decisions to take illegal actions, but that's still idling at the moment. They most likely will take it further down the road unless there's something happens in regards to the idea of removal of those clauses. That remains to be seen what's going to happen. So at the moment, that 50 years after, and it's still there, and the problem is still there, and even though that the communities are getting the same kind of a service as the other communities, in regards to the benefits and things in that nature and that, they part of it, but they still highlight the importance of those clauses to be removed. Thank you.
Je voulais juste ajouter que il y a quelques affaires, vous autres. Les CRI n'ont pas pris la position que tous leurs droits étaient. Yeah, I was saying the CRIs have not taken the position that all their rights have been extinguished. To the contrary. Secondly, in 1982, the rights under the agreement, as well as their inherent Aboriginal rights, there are inherent Aboriginal rights, take precedence over anything else, including any specific extinguishment clause. All the treaties, the numbered treaties, have an extinguishment clause, by the way. So what Charlie is saying is it's not just with the Aboriginal peoples, and obviously you have the Declaration of the Rights of Aboriginal Peoples, which comes along and basically condemns any question of a extinguishment. So the problem again was in 1898 and 1912, but I don't personally. Okay, I'm just talking personally, and you can criticize all you want, but personally, I do not. I am not pessimistic about this. I don't take the position that all the rights have been surrendered and or have been extinguished. To the contrary, I say they have been recognized, and so what? As Charlie was saying in a way, and Harvey's brought out that point. If you went, forget about the Canadian law, but if you went to Aboriginal peoples and you'd say, well, what governs you? They'll say, we have an ordre juridique autochtone. We have our own laws. So according to their own laws, have their rights been taken away? So in virtue of what? In virtue of a particular interpretation of Canadian law? I've contested the so-called extinguishment clause too, many times. But the problem a lot is some take the view that their rights are gone. I don't take that view. I respect the view of others. I really do. But I am not a pessimist in regard to that. So if you look at it, Charlie was talking about the contestations. Of course, you could go to the courts and say, yes, our rights predominate. And even your Constitution, your 1982 amendments to the Constitution, provide that the superior rights, the constitutional rights, are Aboriginal and treaty rights. And these are both Aboriginal and treaty rights. And then you say, at one point in time, right now, you go across the land. I was involved in proceedings recently, in fact, this year, 2024 and 2025, where in Alberta, they say, no, this is just the federal government's arguing this in court before the Alberta Court of Appeal, as well as obviously the provincial court. They're saying the declaration, it's just something that is an aspirational document, the declaration, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Aboriginal People. Well, eventually, it's going to take a bit of time, but that's going to become part of international and Canadian law. So there you say, there is no such thing as extinguishment. Okay, so again, the different views clash. I understand that, and I understand that people will say, O'Reilly, you're out of it. You've been beaten in the court on that point. Well, no, we haven't been beaten in the court on that point. But I do respect that other groups, including lots of, like the Innu, the Atikamekw, several other groups are there. But on the other hand, I do some work still for the Mohawks. And the Mohawks have never said that they are governed by Canadian law. So why do people take such an attitude to say, Canadian law says this, therefore that's what the situation is? Anyway, that's a personal, very personal point of view, and I respect the other point of view. En ce qui concerne now, he asked a question about who approved the agreement. En ce qui concerne la convention de Baie James, côté écrit, la plupart, la grande majorité des adultes crient avant la convention, ont donné une procuration, je les ai au bureau, pour confirmer qu'ils étaient d'accord avec ça. Ensuite, on est les conseils 3 semaines, pour 3 semaines avant la signature de la convention, étaient à Montréal. Et ils ont passé ligne par ligne les projets. Et j'avais eu une discussion avec le grand chef à l'époque, Billy Diamond, et j'ai dit non, il faut que tu traduis ligne par ligne, conceptuellement, etc. Ah, OK. Bon, alors il a dit ça, on va le faire, au moins les gens vont être au courant. Le fédéral a dit après, même si tout le monde était d'accord, ils ont dit que ça a failli de saboter toute l'entente à la dernière minute parce que le fédéral et le Québec voulaient que la convention soit ratifiée. Il fallait qu'elle soit ratifiée encore. C'est-à-dire que ce n'était pas en vigueur à moins que tout le monde était d'accord. Encore. Alors, qui ont dit non. On a déjà signé, on a déjà donné la procuration. Alors, à minuit, c'était les qui ont menacé Québec. Si vous ne signez pas, très bien, on s'en va et on ne revient plus. Pas de négociation, c'est la bataille juridique au fond jusqu'à la fin. Alors, c'est ça. Donc, pour dire qu'il y avait une très grande majorité qui était pour, oui, c'était communauté après communauté, et moi-même personnellement, j'étais présent dans plusieurs des communautés avant la convention, avant qu'elle ait été signée. Ça a été vraiment approuvé par tous les gens. Les gens n'étaient pas contents du projet jusqu'à la fin. Encore aujourd'hui, on n'est pas content du projet. Moi-même, pour les Inuits, on est contre l'Hydro-Québec dans 4 procédures judiciaires. Ce n'est pas des grands amours, là, l'Hydro-Québec.
I'd like to at least get one question from people online, if you forgive me. I think there have been one or two come in, but I don't have the Zoom link. Could you?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So the question is for Mr. Watt. Why did the Inuit choose the provincial regime of Quebec, unlike the Cree EU?
I'm sorry, I don't understand you.
Why did the Inuit choose the provincial regime, unlike the Cree EU?
For government, she's talking about your local government and regional government. Why you went under the provincial regime, whereas the Crees were just for local government.
Okay. That was the point that I was raising earlier, that we did not choose to go under the provincial jurisdiction. When we put forward an idea of self-determination and self-government, we were pushing for ethnic government, Inuit government, not a public government. In order for us to be able to function properly with coming from the Inuit side and deal with a new set of law, it doesn't apply to us, it should not apply to us, but they try to make it apply to us. So that was never been accepted by the Inuit. And if we would have done, let's say, the constitutional negotiations back in 1982, that's when it took place. If the constitutional negotiation was before the James Bay Agreement, we would not be sitting the way we are today. It would be flowing from the constitutional level, already recognized, fully recognized, but that was not the case during the time before 1982? Before 1982. So, matter of fact, I was mentioning earlier, the government of Quebec representative even state for fact that they had no power to create the regional government. Accidentally, the discussion in the negotiation shifted over to regional government concept rather than dealing with the question of ethnic government. That's what happened during the negotiations. During that negotiations, I remember the time that we have to send one of our lawyers to the library to find out for sure to see whether they have the authorities or not in terms of creating a regional government. Our lawyers came back and said, I'm sorry, the government representatives are wrong. And we could not shift it over back to the ethnic government concept because that was something they didn't even want to entertain, to tell you the truth. That's reality. They did not want to entertain that idea. They didn't even want to discuss that idea. So for that reason, they were doing their best to not even to allow us to step into the regional government concept, but let alone they were not prepared at all whatsoever. Talk about new kind of government that they don't know nothing about. When I say new kind of government, I'm talking about Inuit government. If we don't have the authorities of ourselves to govern ourselves, we would not be here today. So it's an important for the Aboriginal people, rights and their power remain within their domain. And that's not what it is today. Even the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement have slightly moved in that direction, but they haven't gone that far enough to be able to satisfy us to say, yes, we can live harmony after all, as a relationship would create a different type of understanding and the feeling. So we still have a long way to go on that aspects of it. So if we were to, let's say, for fact, this is something that is questionable to me in terms of law, what it is. The fact that we negotiated the Constitution of the Aboriginal people, their rights, and during the patriation time, for the very first time that you see something in the Constitution that talks about the Aboriginal people, for the very first time. We never had anything, not even a thought, in the Constitution itself stating the fact, yes, First Nation, Inuit do exist. Nothing. All the interest was during that time is how do we ended up controlling the Aboriginal groups, including their rights to themselves and to their land. That they didn't want to touch. You know, the whole question of title is something the government of Canada is trying their best to stay away from that topic, because it requires people that have made a great deal of investment in this country is going to have to be dealt with. I have only heard one lady, the old lady, saying that I made enough money from the Aboriginal people, therefore I'm prepared to share what I have. Haven't heard anybody else stating that fact. I hope that will help you to understand a bit why that we are in the predicament.
Thank you.
With the system. Thank you.
And thanks to the presenters, all the presenters on this panel, I think, and to the questioners. I know there would be other questions, but we must move on to break. Let's come back in 15 minutes for roundtable 2.